All right. Welcome to SIP episode 69. And as we always like to do, I need famous Bears for 100, Chicago Bears, that is, number 69. I'm going to go with offensive lineman Reevie Sorey from the great heyday of the late 70s, early 80s. Did a lot of blocking for one Walter Payton when the Bears were not so good. And Reevie was a big guy with Noah Jackson pulling her on the side. But we'll talk about the Chicago Bears a little bit later on, or not at all. So it'll be interesting now that pro football's here. But tonight we've got a big night for you. After 2 weeks of vacation, things are a little bit rusty. We knocked over about 12 minutes ago a glass of wine that shattered, a glass of water that shattered. The entire set is soaking wet, and there's live wires nearby. So we're going to try not to end the show. Doug Rutherford, someone is standing in for you because I believe I saw an email that says you weren't going to make it this evening. And I have to give a shout out to Doug Rutherford because on the August 13th email, he was the first one that answered the quiz question correctly with regards to Elkhorn Peak's pet knot. And what was the nod to 2020? There was a surgical mask on that label, a small surgical mask that was the nod for 2020. Ivy, Amy McGowan, Jan Kiefer, Gene Golden, Jeff and Jane Greasy are in the house, as they always are, probably safely ensconced in a camper somewhere, or maybe on the couch in the den. Jim Brubaker is here live from Napa. Not certain if he just left the dinner table and got up and abandoned his party to make the show, which is fantastic. Karen Athanas, Lori, you're going to have to just send me the correct pronunciation again. Mark Challenor, Mark Salazar, Michael Cabral, Peter Glick, and Scotland Kiefer's in the house. And for those of you that don't know Scotland, we're opening 2 bottles tonight. And when we ever open up 2 bottles of wine, it is indeed called the Scotland. So, because Scotland likes to open up 2 bottles of wine weekdays, weekends, Sunday mornings, it just doesn't matter. So we have got a great show for you this evening. For those of you that are new, my name is Martin Cody. I'm a co-founder of Cellar Angels. We are a direct-to-consumer wine company in our 11th year of operation. And what that means to you is that we focus solely on wines exclusively from the Napa and Sonoma valleys, historically, until this evening, where we're going to just venture right across the border and pick up some interesting tidbits from the Lake County area, and I'll show you where that is. But if you don't know anything about Cellar Angels, I need you to go to the Cellar Angels website. So the angel portion of our name has nothing to do with venture capital or private equity. It is because every single transaction benefits a charity and you get to pick the charity. So many of the people this evening are drinking Brian's 2013 Cabernet Franc and his 2013 Petit Verdot, and as are we. So the way they've done that is they've gone to the website, they've navigated over to the SIP virtual tasting kit, which is always the first kit. And you can grab one of these and you will be set for the next 4 to 5 weeks because we have a constant rotation of wines in. But for the next 5 Fridays, you will be able to taste along with the winemaker. And next week's winemaker is a young lady named Katie Miliavaca. And Katie, actually, the Miliavaca family was one of the original founders of Napa Valley. Their winery was founded in 1866. But tonight we are tasting Brian's wines, and you can navigate to the Cellar Angels website to see the wines. But also I want to just let you know about some of the impacts that you're having, because we have 10 or 15 different charities that are doing amazing things. Many of you know Chef Jose Andres and his World Central Kitchen. So we help raise funds for them, Save the Family Farms. One area I want to talk to you about is About Face. This is an amazing charity. And if you have a daughter, if you know a woman, if you have a mom, or if you have a granddaughter, this group is actually helping change and educate young adolescent girls as it relates to body image, because the woman on the cover of Vogue is not actually the person that you need to aspire to be from a body image standpoint. About Face actually helps educate the children and adolescents, specifically females, on media literacy and how to actually have a more positive body image, doing some amazing things. So when you guys buy wine and pick them, we actually can help them. This is what Cellar Angels is. Great wines, getting it into the hands for everybody that doesn't have a chance to go to the valley as often as they would. We drink serious wines. We just don't take ourselves too seriously. And you're helping build the wine community. You're helping build the best wine club in the United States. And you guys are making it happen. So a glass tip to all of you. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's safe. We just had 2 weeks off. and we are a little rusty, so bear with us. Let's get into it, because there are two wines in front of many of you, and both of them are extraordinary, not only for the person who's crafting them, but really the places that they're coming from. And each one has a uniqueness to it that is quite special. So without further ado, I would love to introduce to you Bryan Kane from Cellar Rouge and Howell Mountain Vineyards and a variety of other places, originally from Michigan. Cheers, Bryan.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Martin. So I'm going to let you guys all enjoy the wine. I've been working since early this morning. I had a pick this morning. We picked a Cabernet Sauvignon from our estate vineyard, Cellar Rouge, up in the Red Hills. And I'm heading down to pick a little Pinot Noir in Carneros later.
Yeah, Bryan is going on 20-hour days, 24-hour days, and where Lake County is and where he's driving to immediately after SIP is 2 hours apart. And anybody that's ever driven down Route 29 knows how jam-packed of a traffic jam that can be. So we're extremely grateful to have Bryan here this evening in the middle of harvest, because he's harvesting all over the place. So let's talk first, Bryan, about Cellar Rouge.
Okay.
And I'm interested, and we can even go further back, because historically when people grow up in Michigan, they chase a frozen piece of rubber around on a frozen pond, and that is what they aspire to become. You took a different path, unless there was some collegiate hockey I don't know about.
No, I'm for all of you Blackhawks fan, I am still a diehard Red Wings fan. But don't see them too much out here. Go to a few Sharks games, but no, I ended up finding that I had a love for wine while I was in Michigan, and I was fortunate enough to do my MBA out in California. So that brought me out to California, and I found out learned a lot more about California wines. And it ended up where I not only was able to learn a lot more, I was able to interface directly with a lot of the winemakers. And being a wine geek, a certified wine geek, I just went to a number of the winemakers that I liked, and ended up, volunteering my time. And a few of them said, okay, why not? And help me along.
And this was while you were working in technology, yes?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so you had a little overlap there, and Bryan came from a tech background, was working in the CRM side of enterprise software before there was such a thing as CRM, early on. I believe the term for that is bleeding edge, because that had to be early on. And then you're in the Bay Area and started to branch out and fall in love kind of with the wine scene. Who were some of those early folks that you got to rub elbows with from a winemaking standpoint that you kind of, whether they took you under their wing or kind of shepherded you, that left an impression on you?
Yeah, well, there were several people, but the one who really stands out is Scott Shepley, and he was the assistant winemaker for Siduri. So he worked with Adam and Diana, and Scott did the Rhone projects, and I always loved Rhone wines. And at that point in time in Siduri, there were a number of people starting to make wine, and there were people like Mike and Jay from Carlisle Vineyards, probably my favorite, Zinfandel winery. There were Wells Guthrie, who was Scott's brother-in-law, who actually came out and studied with Scott over at Chapeltier for a while in France. Wow. And then Wells ended up starting his own project, and that was Copan. And so when he started Copan, Scott, myself, and I guess I wasn't making wine commercially at that time, but moved more over to Copan because at that point in time, Adam and Diana were going from just starting to now really growing Siduri. And as you all know, they sold Siduri a number of years ago, as did Wells with Copan. But it was a great place to work.
And greetings to Bill Best, Chris Palm, and I think I actually saw Julie Fogarty. Yes, I did. Thank you all for jumping on. So what year are we talking about here when you started to kind of get an inkling to say, hey, maybe I want to do this a little bit more than just a hobby and do it more full time?
Well, I actually, it was still my hobby, but I had a girlfriend after MBA who gave me a wine course at UC Davis, advanced winemaking. And I went up there and they asked everybody in the room, who here has made wine? And pretty much everybody raised their hand. And then they said, well, how about who hasn't made wine before? And it was me and one other person. And I'm sitting next to the Groths and all of these people who are, part of, Napa's history. And I was very fortunate to sit next to a couple chemists from UC Berkeley. And they were saying, well, we'll get you into making wine, and gave me some carboys. And I got into sourcing some wine up in Amador County, and made wine for a couple of years in my garage, and it wasn't very good.
Well, and just from a background standpoint for the audience, the Groths were the first winery to have a 100-point wine in Napa Valley. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was a 1986 Cabernet Sauvignon or right up thereabouts. So that's some good people to be rubbing elbows with, and some good chemists that want to say, oh yeah, we'll get you making wine.
So it was that, but I wasn't making the quality of wine that I wanted to, and but I was drinking a lot of great wine. And back then, there were these up and coming wineries that were pretty easy to get on their list. They were pouring at family winemakers like Screaming Eagle, Bryan Family, Arajo, people like that who were really trying to just get their names out there. And so I ended up meeting a lot of those people and ended up, kind of networking and getting a little bit closer to them. And sometimes I'd go out and I'd pick seconds. So that means that after the commercial winemakers would pick all of their grapes, you'd go back out and pick whatever's left out in the field. And it's really a tough project to do. You don't get a whole lot of grapes, but I was making much better wine because I had better grapes. So then I started to do a little trading, and I said, hey, if I'm here working with you, can I just get a little bit of grapes from you? And people were okay with that. And I would get a little bit of grapes, and I started learning because I was working alongside these commercial winemakers. I did all of their labs. I'd learn more about what they did. I learned about barrel treatments, things like that. And I was really good at taking notes.
Give me a definition of two things. Well, for everyone on the tasting in the audience, I keep saying audience, like you're all live here. The family winemakers is actually a group. It's a consortium of family winemakers. What is there, like 600 of them now? But it's a fairly large organization. And we have an interview with them coming up, ironically enough. But it's interesting to actually, when you think of the Arroyos and Screaming Eagle and Bryant family, and they're all just starting out trying to make a name for themselves and sitting at these tasting areas. I think that's amazing. You talked a second ago about a commercial winemakers. What is a commercial winemaker?
Well, commercial winemakers, meaning the Arajos, the Bryan families, and so forth. So instead of getting grapes that home winemakers were using, I was getting some of the must that would go into these great wines. And I'll tell you one little secret. You can never make a better wine than the grapes are. It all starts with the grapes.
Right.
The winemaker can only express what comes out of that grape. And some do it better or worse than others. But you can't take bad grapes and make them into good wine. So that was the key to me, really learning about if I wanted to make wine, I needed the best grapes possible.
Right. No, and that's a great point to remember. You can't take mediocre grapes and make great wine, but you can certainly take great grapes and make mediocre wine if you do a few things. It does work in reverse, not well. Do me a quick technology favor. Do you have an external mic on?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, get a little closer.
That's a little bit better. Yes.
Okay.
So you mentioned earlier you had a fondness for Rhone, and I'm trying to guess your age at this point in time, and I'm thinking to myself, not everybody just kind of matriculates with a fondness for Rhone,
Yeah.
because that, especially with the big six in the United States, those grapes, where did that come from?
I think my love for the Rhones came after I'd gone through my Cabernet phase, which everybody goes through, and then went through my Pinot Chardonnay phase, and got to the Rhones, Italians, and some of the others. And I actually went through Italians a little bit earlier because being from the East Coast or being from the East Michigan, we didn't really have a whole lot of California wines growing up. It was mostly French and Italian. So I looked at it and said, I kind of progressed through these different ones. And for me, Rhones were really underserved here in California, but they were great wines with food. And a lot of the food that I enjoyed eating, which is the Mediterranean style food. So I ended up gravitating a lot to the Rhone region, and I guess I'm still there.
No, that's interesting. And it's funny, we mentioned Parker earlier, and Robert Parker is not a paid sponsor. Just for the record, we actually have no paid sponsors, but just letting you know that Parker's not one. He's actually giving more 100-point scores to the Rhone than any other region. So
Really?
it's fascinating that, because we love the Rhone. Prior to Cellar Angels, many people know that Mission Control and I owned a bricks and mortar wine store and fell in love with the Rhone just because of the quality to price ratio and just so food friendly and really. Mission Control, by the way, is my spouse, who you will hear whispering in the background and also in my ear. So it's annoying, but I think a lot of you can relate to that. But necessary. So the Rhone phase I love, and yet you've got Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc, which
yes.
we will not find in the Rhone unless someone is lost. And let's we're going to do our first poll question. And for those of you, Chris Palm, Karen, who does not want to be in camera, Lori, you guys, there's a $5 ante. We will hit you up on your email for the poll questions. But the first poll question we're going to launch right now, and it's a speed round, so you have to answer these fast. Which grape is older, Petit Verdot or Cabernet Franc? Smartphones down. I'm going to give you 8 seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pretty good responses. Neck and neck.
Wow.
Any idea, Brian?
I'd be guessing here, but I would say Petit Verdot.
Your guess would be wrong. It actually is Cabernet Franc and this gets kind of interesting because there's some papal Roman Catholic influence, as there always is, right? When you go back this far. But Cabernet Franc, 17th century, Petit Verdot, 18th century, right in and around the Bordeaux region, the 17th century on the Cab Franc with a cardinal using some clippings and stuff and bringing it to the Bordeaux region. So that for 7 of you, 54% got that one correct, which is a pretty high average. The group is smart, but they just don't test well here at Cellar Angels. So very, very good. Karen, okay, guessing doesn't work. And Karen, that was a little bit of a softball because that was a 50-50 chance. So when did you, I know you still love the Rhone, but talk to us about Cab Franc and Petit Verdot.
Well, I think the reason why I planted the Cab Franc was because when I originally set up my vineyard, Sol Rouge, it was to make Chef de Pop style wine and put it all together. But at that point in time, I was making wine at Nicholson Ranch, where Thomas Brown, or people know him as Thomas Rivers Brown now, was also making the Schrader and these other wines. And he's like, you need to plant Cabernet Sauvignon. He's just like, you need to do that. It's going to be a good grape for you. It's a good money grape. And the Red Hills does a really good job with it. And he had just received 91 points from his Amber Knolls, the first vintage of his Amber Knolls Schrader wine up there. So I did some research and I said, okay, I'll plant Cabernet Sauvignon. It does well up there. And Beckstoffer, that's pretty much all he plants.
Right.
But I said, if I'm going to do Cabernet Sauvignon, I want to do something I can blend into it. And I really like Viader. And I said, okay, I'm going to plant some Cabernet Franc as well. And we were originally going to do a high-end bottling, which was going to be a blend of Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. And at that point in time, it was the first leaf, or really not the first leaf, the first harvest was 2009. It was not a very good time to come out with a high-end wine. So we decided to do the varietal on its own. And we produced the Sol Rouge Cabernet Franc. And the Chronicle named it the best Cab Franc in America. And then we couldn't get away from it. And to date, we've never gotten lower than a 92 points on our Cab Franc. And our latest one is 94 points in Editor's Choice. So it's kind of tough to get away from that.
No, and that's awesome. And it's in my opinion, it's an unheralded grape in the United States. It's an amazing bottle of wine when it's done well. And clearly you have a gift and a magic to be able to do it well, because as you mentioned, it's never scored below 92. Cabernet Franc is also, fun fact, this isn't a poll question, is the parent of Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Carmenere. So Cabernet Franc gets around, I think, is what we're trying to say here from a cross-pollinating standpoint. But why do you think it grows so well up there?
Well, one thing about our vineyard, it is the one grape that grows the best, it sets the best, and we get the most even crop year after year after year. And it's just our microclimate. We're up in the mountains, in the very northern edge of the Mayacamas Mountains. So there's tons of microclimates. So what does well in one area might not do well, a quarter of a mile down the road. Just where we planted it, it just seems to be the easiest varietal, and it does the best year in, year out at the block that we planted it at Sol Rouge.
Well, and I know in 2009, you didn't go ahead and produce that blend because for those of us with long memories, that was, right on the heels of the largest global economic collapse since the Great Depression. And probably coming out with $100 and some odd bottle of wine I think that's a prudent move, Brian, not to put that one on the back burner. But did you ever then, when things started recover, did you ever go back and make it?
No, we actually did not. Jill and I decided to keep the program the same. We make 14 different wines right now. We have a wine club where it gets 6 bottles in the spring and 6 bottles in the fall. That's our Hillside Club. And so even our Hillside Club doesn't get all of our wines. You really need to get up to our Terrace Club, where you get a case in the fall and a case in the spring to get all of our wines. So we produce a lot of wines, decided that it was not the right time to introduce another wine to the program.
No, and that makes sense. And I know Jim Brubaker is on. So Jim, shout out to Jim. I may have mentioned this earlier because he got the Miliavaca answer correct. There was an answer that escaped everyone earlier this week on Tuesday's email with regards to the Hapa viticulturist. The Hapa viticulturist, a Hapa is actually a term used in the Polynesian Islands, Hawaiian Islands, that indicates a person of either Asian American descent or Polynesian descent. And our winemaker, who we've had on before, and I think is coming up again, yes, Lise Asamont from Dot Wines is a Hapa. So that one we're going to have to tone down because that one was a little bit of a fact finder. You had to know your research there. The Cab Franc, and I like the microclimate that you're talking about because you're right. I think it's interesting. It's actually really jaw dropping when you look at something that not even a quarter mile away, it could be 500 yards away, that totally different expression based upon elevation, based upon microclimate, based upon exposure. And the Cab Franc that you produce is magical, in my opinion. It just has that wonderful, it has such balance, such depth, such texture and layered, and it doesn't have the overpronounced green pepper elements that, not necessarily a flaw in a wine, but seemingly that is a predominant flavor that I get in a lot of California Cabernet Franc. Is there something that you recognize on how to not make that happen?
Well, I have to give it credit to one of my mentors, Denny Melbeck. He was a fourth generation winemaker from Chateau Latour. Unfortunately, Denny's no longer with us, but he did a number of great wines, both in France and here. And Denny told me, he goes, when you think the Cabernet, or as Denny would say, when you think the Cabernet Franc is Richie's big, he goes, give it another week. And if it's still nice, good weather, give it another week. But there's different things about, it. And what it does is that makes the seeds browner. And so you go out and you feel the leaf, and you want the leaves to still be green, and you want them to still be a little bit cooler than the temperature there. It's because then photosynthesis is happening. The grapes won't shrivel at that point in time, but they'll just hang there. And if the weather is cooperative, you can get a really long hang time on the Cabernet Franc, and the seeds turn less green. And thus it doesn't over ripen, but yet all the phenolics on the grape happen. We end up, the tannins on the skins will resolve a bit. The tannins in the seeds will be less because of the green. We also planted 2 different clones of Cab Franc, and one clone is more prone to having green bits, and the other clone less. We didn't know that until we started fermenting them separately. But now we watch that a little bit closer too. You want a little bit of that greenness, but you just don't want it to overtake the wine like it does in a lot of places.
Well, and I think that lends itself to experience and having a number of harvests under your belt, because I would imagine there is a tendency or an impatience or a lack of discipline, because you want to pick and you want to pick and you want to pick, and you have to pull it back and have the discipline to remember that Mr. Malbec saying, no, wait another week. Because
it's sometimes the last varietal in the vineyard to be picked.
Right, and it's late October, and you're like, we've got to get this in. So, all right, we're going to go to our next poll question. We're talking about Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. So let's just find out how large a planting is of these, or specifically of Petit Verdot, since we're going to go to that one next. So in California, how many acres of Petit Verdot are planted? I can see people typing Petit Verdot. There's no E on Petit, so it's not going to come up with a search. I'm going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2.5, 2.25, 1. Oh, these are my favorite ones. So now we're going off the vineyard report from 2016. So I'm sure some of you will send letters to say you were talking about the 2018 numbers. But the amount of acres planted of Petit Verdot in California, the most recent data we have is 3,228 acres. So no one got it right, which is unfortunate. Did you have any idea, Brian, it was that much?
I knew it wasn't the first 2. I knew it was one of the second 2. A lot of people use it as a blender, especially in Cabernet, or as what they call ruby cap. It's often used in the Central Coast to give the wine more color and more tannins, because 95% of all the wine that everybody drinks, or more than that, just comes from ruby Cabernet in Central Coast that they call Cabernet Sauvignon, and it needs a little bit of structure.
No, and it's interesting. And Cabernet Sauvignon itself, in that same report, has over 90,000 acres planted. And I know that number has gone up. So that gives you an idea of just how dominant Cab is. compared to some of these other varietals. So now Petit Verdot. Oh, and by the way, if anybody wants to, Mission Control is going to start highlighting cameras. So if you want to throw on a robe, some sort of clothing, and you want to turn your camera on, this is an adult program. That would be terrific. Petit Verdot single bottling. And we've had, just to give you a little bit of background, this is episode 69, as you know. We've done Burgundy, we've done Bordeaux, we've done barrel making, we've gone to the Coopers in France, but we've done all over the place. We did Burgundy in 90 minutes or 60 minutes, so not many people can do that. But Bordeaux, we learned a great deal about the impact. I mean, Bordeaux is flat compared to what Napa has with regards to, sure, it has a maritime influence because of the river, but it's pretty, there's not a lot of topography changes. And 99% of Petit Verdot in Bordeaux is blended. Yet in the United States, we actually do single bottling of it, and you do it incredibly well, like the Cab Franc. Why do a single bottling of Petit Verdot?
It had a little bit to do with the situation when I came on to Howell Mountain Vineyards as the winemaker. Dave Feeney, who some of you might know from The Prisoner, did quite well, and he was the winemaker previous to me. And when he sold The Prisoner, he didn't need to do a lot of these small projects. And I shared a couple of vineyards with Dave, including Howell Mountain Vineyards, which was what he used to put into the Mercury Head, if anybody's ever had that. And it ended up being a project that I was, a couple of years later, after making wine for 2 years, they said I was doing a good enough job and named me the winemaker. And we didn't do Petit Verdot originally. And we talked a little bit about how do we want to grow the brand to what it used to be, which was, distributed largely by Southern Wine and Spirits and was in a lot of states, or did we want to keep it boutique? And Mike Beatty, Mike Beatty and Jerry Sears from the Black Sears started Howell Mountain Vineyards back in 1988. And they originally did it to highlight Howell Mountain. Because
no, let me stop you right there, because I did not know Black Sears was named after Jerry Sears. I did not know that was his vineyard.
Okay, yeah,
that's crazy cool. Thank you. I mean, because there's some Zinfandel that comes out of there that's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you would educate the group on Mike Beatty.
Okay. So Mike Beatty originally comes from Ohio, but he got recruited by Stanford and came out, played football for Stanford, and stayed in Northern California, but he grew up on a farm. He wanted his kids to be exposed to that side of the lifestyle rather than just living down a mountain view. So he bought this old vineyard that had been neglected up in Howell Mountain. But it had these great old vines. And so it had the oldest vines in all of Howell Mountain for Zinfandel, and these old Cabernet Sauvignon vines. So Mike ended up purchasing this, and he ended up being one of the big growers in that area. And he had quite a bit of property. Those of you who know Neal family, Neal bought part of Mike's property to start Neal family. And Mike helped other people when they were first starting, Jerry Sears being one of them. And I can see my signs falling.
Hey,
back here. Let me fix it 1 second. So,
it's live TV. Don't worry about it. I broke 2 glasses 30 minutes ago.
This is live TV. So Mike Beatty and Jerry Sears and Randy Dunn and a bunch of people in Howell Mountain decided that they were going to form Napa Valley's first sub-AVA, and that would be Howell Mountain. And they went through and a whole map. And I actually have a video that I can share with you guys later who are interested. This isn't going to work. They defined Howell Mountain, and then nobody was putting that on their labels because it didn't mean anything. People would just do Napa Valley. So Jerry and Mike decided they're going to start a winery. And they went and got this young winemaker who was at Honig called James Hall. You guys probably know him from Patson Hall to make wine. And they put out Howell Mountain Vineyards essentially to elevate Howell Mountain as an AVA so that they could sell their fruit for more. And it ended up working over time.
Well, and it's an amazing story. And I did not know Mike played football at Stanford. That explains his size, because he is a relatively large man. And I think when I interviewed him, I had to stand on a milk crate or something. But it was impressive. And, you know, when you're making wine with Randy Dunn, Mike Beatty, and these guys, and you're establishing, you're breaking new ground, literally and metaphorically and figuratively rather, because Howell Mountain AVA wasn't set up yet. And these guys decided, let's do that. And everyone knows what Randy's wines can do, especially over 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, and incredible.
Yeah, they are incredible. And then, so now you come into the fold and decide, okay, well, the Petit is going to be good. We're not going to do 3,000 cases of distribution, but we can make really a micro production of it because the fruit is so darn good.
Yeah, and most of the time now, when people bought fruit from, or they still buy fruit from Beatty Ranch, they would blend the Petit Verdot in. And we were looking at keeping the brand, the boutique brand, doing more direct to consumer. And that means you need to produce enough wines to have a wine club. So I talked Mike into allowing me to do the Petit Verdot and the Cab Franc on its own. And that gave us 2 more wines to come to market. And immediately the Somme started geeking out over it. And, you know, it was not every state carries these wines that we're distributed in. Only the bigger ones, or we end up doing special pourings or winemaker dinners, and we'll bring the wine in for those. They're still relatively small productions. The Cabernet Franc is growing in production. They're actually going to replant and plant more Cabernet Franc. The Cabernet Franc from Howell Mountain Vineyards last year won the Texom judges selection for the best Cab Franc in the world at Texas's largest thing. So yeah, I've been very fortunate with Cab Franc, and I have a couple of great vineyards, Cellar Rouge being mine, but also Howell Mountain having it. So we started doing both Petit Verdot and Cab Franc on its own, primarily to get more wine out directly to consumers and having enough wine to do a wine club.
And what is case production today of the Cab Franc and case production of the Petit Verdot?
Oh, the case production on the Cab Franc, well, this year it'll be down quite a bit because all the yields are down. It'll be more like 2015. But we try to get about 250 to 300 cases of the Cab Franc. Maybe we've grown that a bit this last year, and then about 150 cases of the Petit Verdot. So they're still very, very small productions compared to our main Cabernet Sauvignon and our Old Vine Zinfandel at Howell Mountain.
And just to let everyone know where Bryan is broadcasting from this evening on about an hour and a half of sleep. This is the future Cellar Rouge tasting room and an eatery. So up in Kelseyville, he's going to be opening up a very, very nice tasting facility. And there's a draw to Kelseyville because of the soil for a winemaker, but also if you're going to open up we all know how expensive the land is in Napa. It's not as expensive just right across the border in the next county. And as a matter of fact, why don't I show you where this is?
Awesome.
I'm surprised no one has chanted. And when I say no one, I'm looking at you, Greasy and Kiefer, for Google Earth. So here we go. Everyone knows that blue orb, but what you may not know, as I said at the outset of the show, is the wine regions that we focus on. And we are all about Napa and Sonoma. And this is Napa and Sonoma County, Napa County, and this is Lake County. So this is the next county north. And Bryan, you had mentioned earlier when we were prepping yesterday or today that this used to be part of Napa.
Correct, yeah. Before they subdivided and created the county of Lake. They defined it more by the geography, and our geography, I mean, what the largest part of the Mayacamas Mountains is in Lake County, and we're at the very top of the Mayacamas Mountains, and at the very northern edge. And it ends up, a little bit on the other side. So between Sonoma and Lake County is where the Mayacamas Mountains are.
Got it.
And a little bit further south there. So it kind of goes between Napa, Sonoma, and Lake County. And we have a mountain there called Cobb Mountain, which is about 3,000 feet elevation and produces the highest elevation Cabernet Sauvignon in the entire North Coast.
Wow.
A grower that I've worked with for a number of years has that vineyard, and it's pretty intense fruit up at 3,000 feet elevation. So well, Rouge is at 1,800 feet elevation. So we're more on the foothills of these large mountains, and we're on the foothill of Mount Konocti, which is 4,300 feet elevation.
Okay, and I'm going to show Sol Rouge in a second. And that's, what's that?
Is that behind you?
I don't understand the question from Mission Control. His virtual background says Sol Rouge.
Yours.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. This is Sol Rouge. Oh, the team is a little rusty after 2 weeks off. I apologize. So we talk often about the maritime influence, and you can even see it in Lake County. There's a huge body of water up here, but you also have the Pacific influence. You have San Pablo Bay down here. You have Lake Hennessy, but Howell Mountain, to give you an idea of where that is.
So Howell Mountain is on the Vaca Range, which is across on the eastern side of Napa Valley, which looks at the Mayacamas Mountain Range, which is on the western side.
And you can see how rugged this terrain is. I mean, there's some huge valleys and canyons over here for the Howell Mountain Vineyard. And it's fairly steep because I filmed Mike in this vineyard a while ago. And when you get down to the ground level, you can see the hillside that might not be as evident from Google Earth. I mean, these things go virtually straight up. As a matter of fact, I had, and I'm sure you know it well, Brian, a small tractor that just chugs up these rows.
Oh, yeah.
That it looks like it came from the 1930s, but it's nice and narrow. It's not, it's not a huge tractor, but that is a beautiful, a lot of relief with regard to this vineyard. And I'm curious, from a geeky standpoint, ground cover. What is your philosophy on ground cover? Because I know you are a huge advocate of sustainable farming.
Yeah, and so Mike does most of the farming for Howell Mountain, and I could talk to it a bit. But Mike's philosophy is that he will disc every other row, because then you can work off of the rows that have the grass, and he'll mow those, and that has less dust and so forth. But then you can disc everything back into the soil on that. So he switches rows every other year.
Interesting.
Yeah,
all right.
To keep everything more sustainable.
Correct. So now if we go north to Lake County, and we're going to do it at a higher elevation, you can see kind of where we are. You've got San Francisco off in the distance. Here's Cobb Mountain that you talked about. Kelseyville, where you are right now, and you've got, again, a 2-hour drive south. So I appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. And if I go to where Sol Rouge is in here, you said it was at kind of mid-level. It looks like it's surrounded by a bowl of mountains.
Yes, it is. We are very unique in that we have every single aspect except for due east. We're basically at the end of a valley. So there's a big ridge called Benson Ridge, which is the northern edge of the Mayacamas Mountains. And when that hits Mount Konocti, which is the largest mountain in that region at 4,300 feet elevation, we're right where those two meet. And when we bought the property, it was a old walnut orchard that had basically been let go. And they don't allow you to farm anything this steep in California anymore.
I was going to say, you must be grandfathered in.
That was the thing. We had to go back and prove that this area had been farmed before. And so we got a bunch of photos from the 1940s, aerial photos. And then we started with chainsaws and going along and trying to define the edges. We were fortunate enough to find some old fencing. And then we were able to follow that fencing along. And I lost about 20 pounds, me and the crew. But before we bought the property, before we closed on the property, we wanted to make sure that we could farm it. And so we went through the process. I was very fortunate that I worked with Andy Beckstoffer and David Beckstoffer up in Lake County here. And they pointed me to their person who did all of their compliance with the county. And they helped me to get through the process. And we had Glenn McCordy, who's the Lake and Mendocino UC Davis head, came out along with a number of other people, and they gave us what was called an EPIC permit, which was a Lake County permit that allowed us to bypass the CEQA process because we were able to prove that this area had been farmed before. So we got an exemption, and we were able to clear anything that was up to 35% slope, which we can now farm up and down, which you see here. We started about 20% slope at the bottom of this up and down, and then 35% slope where the road goes. Anything above that was old terracing, and they would not allow us to re-terrace the vineyard. All we could do was to basically fix the existing terrace.
Right.
So it looks a little like Côte Rôtie, except for we didn't put all the rocks up along there, but the rows don't go nice straight across. They kind of follow the natural topography. And that's where they planted walnut terraces back in the 30s when the government incented people to plant walnuts because it was an exportable crop at that time.
Well, I just like that the sentiment and philosophy you started out with, which really has led to some of my most favorite afternoons ever, it began with the sentence, "Let's start with chainsaws." So that really is, I mean, after that, everything is just going to be a good time when you start with chainsaws. So that is fantastic. And so all these rocks, I would imagine you pulled out of the vineyard?
Oh yeah, that's one of the piles of rocks that still exists. Over time, we've been able to get rid of some of the piles of rocks. There are people who sell these rocks for decorative reasons, and they come over and they take the rocks away so that we don't have to do it. But we do have a big pile right behind the barn there.
That's incredible. Very steep. And I love when I find properties that kind of were grandfathered in and the slopes are extreme, which is what you have there.
Up at the top, it's about 55% slope. So it was very tough to walk straight up. So you kind of have to walk on an angle to get up there.
Oh, geez. Not a lot of mechanization up there. How are you harvesting up there?
Oh, that's a fun one. So we Honda farm up there. Yeah, you can't get even a crawler up there. The rows are too narrow on the terraces. We ended up going with planting of 6x3. So it's a very high vine density planting. So we can't get anything other than a Honda ATV through there. So we do a lot of that very manual. And it's always interesting during harvest because it takes a little longer to pick because the Honda ends up being the limiting factor of taking the grapes from when they pick it down below. So we only go with a team of about 6 people when we pick the terrace blocks.
Wow.
Versus the traditional 10 to 12.
Let me ask you this. Scotland has a great comment observation. Getting a lot of spice on the Cab Franc, and it looks like there's a small amount of new oak. Is that just due to the varietal or the vineyard site, the spice?
Wow, there is no new oak on the Cab Franc. I have never put new oak on Cab Franc. I was very fortunate to be able to taste through a lot of barrels over the years with Denny. He's he was definitely a barrel geek. You know, one of the things that he said is you don't need to put a lot of tannins on Cab Franc. So he suggested with my production that I don't use any new oak and that I only use once and twice used barrels. So actually there is no new oak.
That's awesome. And when you have two single varietals right here and single bottling, when you get the harvest in and you get the pick in, how do you go through the decision-making process that, yep, we're going to bottle this separate and it's not going to go into a blend?
Well, that happened back in when we bottled in 2009, and it did so well at Cellar Rouge, and we kind of couldn't pull it away. And our production was kind of small at that point in time. We expanded our vineyard more. What we wanted to do originally was to do the Chateauneuf de Pape blend, and then whatever was extra, we would put out. So we put out a Grenache, a Mourvedre, a Syrah, a Cinsault, and now Counoise. So as the vineyards really developed, we've grown our thing that way rather than focused on a high-end blend. Now, will we do a high-end blend in the future? Possibly, but that's what drove us to do the Cab Franc 100%. Is it just took off and people love it, and it was kind of tough to pull that away. Now, Petit Verdot is, Mike pretty much sells most of his grapes. So you might have had the nickel and nickel, Beatty Ranch. You might have had a Duckhorn cab from Howell Mountain. Well, Mike's been the Duckhorn, Howell Mountain cab since Duckhorn started. So it's these,
Wow.
These types of things where he gets to pick and choose what he wants to keep. And when we started doing the single varietals, he liked them. And every year he wants to keep a little bit of that. It's been requested for a number of years for us to do a higher end blend and do a Bordeaux blend with the Cab Franc and the Petit Verdot. I think Mike's pretty close to doing that. Last year, unfortunately, with the fires, we did not end up harvesting the Petit Verdot, but because it takes on smoke taint pretty well. We did harvest the rest of it, and with using some natural methods of just controlling yeast halls and things like that, we have produced wine that does not have detectable smoke taint in it, which I'm really happy about, because the 2020 cabs are going to be incredible. It was just a great year for Cabernet Sauvignon. It's just unfortunate we had fires, but those that actually get produced are going to be incredible.
And well, they're going to be incredible for you. Not everyone was able to produce them, so that's good that you were able to produce them.
Yeah. But whoever is able to produce them, it was quite a great year. Probably, to date in barrel, my favorite out of the 11 vintages that I've made wine from Howell Mountain.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
And so now we have a number of people that always get out to the valley and they always ask us, where should I taste? And so where should they hook up with Bryan?
Well, so as far as Cellar Rouge, we are opening up a tasting room in 2022 up in Kelseyville. So Kelseyville is right off of 29. As a matter of fact, 29 used to go right through main town, but they now have it right outside. Something they should have done with St. Helena a long time ago to make that loop, but one day they'll get that. And it's it's something that's about 45 minutes north of Calistoga. And the thing is, nobody ever goes past Calistoga. Nobody ever goes over that hill, but there is wine country up here. Not as many wineries. Not as many places to stay, not as many places to eat, but if you do want to come up, I can point you to the right places, and we'd love to have you up and taste. And the winery is close to the vineyard and close to the tasting room. They're all here in Kelseyville. I oftentimes entertain groups, do a little barrel sampling. It's it's been great. People get to taste the Cab Franc clones separately now, since we ferment them separately, and they're literally planted right next to one another, but you get to taste them separate and they taste very different. And it's because of the clone. And so you get to, to learn more about it. And so I do that for groups, for Sol Rouge. Now, Howell Mountain's a little tougher. We don't have a tasting room. Mike will sometimes do vineyard tours for, larger groups of people. Sometimes they do it along with another Howell Mountain winery. But Mike doesn't do that very often. So what we do is we point people to a couple different places. There are places in St. Helena that have our wine by the glass. The Saint Wine Bar is right down there. If you've been to St. Helena, a number of people might have been there. It's kind of a long-standing wine bar. And they have at least our Cab and our Zinfandel typically by the glass. And then there's other restaurants, Goose and Gander being the one in St. Helena that probably has, they have our Petit Verdot, they have our Cab Franc, they have our Cabernet Sauvignon, and they have our Old Vine Zin. So, we point people to those places. And then in San Francisco, the Howell Mountain is part of the Winery Collective tasting room, which Sol Rouge is also part of. And they always have a couple things open from both Howell Mountain and from Sol Rouge. And so we point people there who, when they first come in, if they're staying on a day, before they go up to the valley or on the way back from the valley, to check out, the Winery Collective. And it's also good because if you bought some stuff up in the valley, it's always difficult to get it shipped home. So a lot of people, we point people that way so that they can kind of complete their case and ship it under our, wine shipping.
Wow, that's actually kind of special. So Winery Collective will do that?
Yes, because it has a third-party shipper that is able to ship all of those wines as a winery. So all of the brands that we have work with this third-party shipper, and they're able to ship other brands. So it's always tough. You go to Napa, and unless you ship from that winery, or unless you happen to know a third-party shipper in Napa, it's always tough to get the wine home, and unless you box it up and take it on the plane. But the Winery Collective can help with that.
Another question I have, actually, no, I don't. Jeff told me I was rusty, so I stand corrected. Jeff, Mission Control, has already pointed out the level of rust is, I need a tetanus shot. There's so much rust on our game this evening. But I did want to ask the studio audience if there was a favorite. Petit Verdot, Cab Franc. They aren't your regular big six. So I don't know if anybody is gravitating towards one or the other. I kind of have. I'm torn, Brian, because they're both so ridiculously good, and you don't often open up a bottle of Petit Verdot, which is a sin. I should start doing that more often. But boy,
Michel Rouland thinks that Petit Verdot is or California is the best climate for that varietal, and we should be planting Petit Verdot here in California. Unfortunately, the market's not there, so
no.
We end up doing a little bit of it, and yes, people just don't open up a bottle of Petit Verdot. But no, these two wines, they're very different. It's tough to say whether you like one better or not, at least in my opinion, because it depends upon what you're eating, how you're feeling, what mood you're in, because they're so radically different. It's not like comparing two Cab Francs or two Cabernet Sauvignons,
right,
next to one another.
That's awesome. Well, we are indebted that you have spent so much time with us this evening, considering it is the time of year when you are at your busiest and your windshield time is maximized between vineyards, and you had to pick this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. You've got to pick this evening. So I want to thank you for that. It's always great to visit with you. I learned something every single time, and I hope the audience enjoyed it because your recognition, winemaker of the year, you've got awards that are as long as my arm. It must get boring looking at the mantle with the amount of hardware that you've attained over the years. But it really is a testament to the Midwestern boy pursuing a dream and actually just working your tail off, which is, I know what you do. So I want to raise a glass to you and thank you so much for this evening and spending some time with us. Everybody else, tomorrow we're celebrating an anniversary that we never wanted to celebrate. So we are indebted to your participation in Cellar Angels, and hopefully we can all, as we close every week, be good to one another, be thankful for everything that we have, because we are all very fortunate and we can't do this without you. So we try to do great things for worthy causes with fantastic wines. And I think what you've seen and heard and tasted from Bryan this evening is another testament to that. So all of you be safe. Thanks so much for your participation. We hope to see you again next Friday with Katie Miliavaca, and we're going to go all the way back to 1866. Cheers, everyone. Be good.